"Lucian," he said, using the king's personal name as only an old friend could. "What's this about?" "Come forward, Matthias." Lucia's voice carried across the hall, cold, and the silver chains burned her wrists as her father's hand shoved her forward into the throne room. And Lady Seraphina Ashford realized with crystalline clarity that the Duke had just sold her like livestock to the creature seated before them. The vampire king whose red eyes promised both damnation and something far more terrifying than death. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The throne room of Nighthaven Castle stretched before her like the throat of some great beast, all black marble and crimson velvet, lit by chandeliers that dripped with crystals the color of old blood. Seraphina's bare feet, her father hadn't even allowed her shoes for this transaction, slapped against the cold stone as she stumbled, catching herself before she fell completely. "As promised, Your Majesty," Duke Ashford said, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness that had charmed 3 wives to early graves. "My eldest daughter, 22 years old, untouched, educated in 7 languages, trained in music and—" Silence. The single word from the throne cut through her father's sales pitch like a blade through silk. Seraphina lifted her eyes for the first time to truly look at the being who had purchased her. Vampire King Lucian Nightshade sat sprawled across his throne with the casual confidence of an apex predator who had forgotten what fear felt like. He appeared no older than 30, with midnight black hair that fell to his shoulders and a face that could have been carved by a master sculptor obsessed with capturing beauty and cruelty in equal measure. He wore black on black, silk shirt, leather breeches, boots that gleamed like oil. And when he moved, it was with the liquid grace of shadows bleeding across a wall. But his eyes— gods above and below, his eyes. They burned red as fresh rubies, red as arterial blood, red as the roses that grew on graves. And they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle and her pulse hammer in her throat. "Come here, girl." It wasn't a request. Seraphina's feet moved before her mind fully processed the command, carrying her across the expanse of marble until she stood at the base of the dais, close enough that she could see the way his pupils contracted as he breathed in, scenting her. "Do you know why your father brought you here?" Lucian asked, his voice a dark purr that seemed to resonate in her chest. "To settle his debts," Seraphina replied, proud that her voice emerged steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "He gambled away the family fortune at your establishments. The contract states that, in lieu of monetary payment, he may— alternative compensation." One dark eyebrow arched. "You've read the contract?" "I read everything I could find about you, Your Majesty. Before I was dragged from my bed 3 hours ago, I spent the previous week in our library researching every text on vampires, on your bloodline, on the Nightshade dynasty that has ruled the Shadow Territories for 400 years. She lifted her chin. "If I'm to be property, I prefer to know my owner's history." Behind her, the Duke made a strangled sound. "Seraphina, mind your tongue." I said silence. This time, Lucian didn't even glance at the Duke. His eyes remained locked on Seraphina, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his perfect features. "You researched me thoroughly. And what did you learn?" Serafina took a breath, aware that her next words could determine whether she lived to see sunrise. That you're the most dangerous vampire in existence. That you unified the warring vampire houses under your rule 2 centuries ago through a combination of strategy and slaughter. That you've killed 17 vampire challengers in formal duels, and that number doesn't count your victims in actual warfare. That you keep human servants but have never taken a human bride. That you're considered a brilliant tactician, a ruthless negotiator, and that you once burned an entire city to the ground because its lord insulted your sister. My late sister, Lucian corrected softly. She died 80 years ago. I know. Killed by vampire hunters while visiting the human territories under a peace banner. Her murderers were never found because someone protected them, someone powerful enough that even you couldn't uncover their identity. Serafina paused. I'm sorry for your loss. The throne room fell so silent that she could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the torch flames crackling in their sconces, could hear her father's ragged breathing behind her. Then Lucian smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just realized the rabbit in front of it. Duke Ashford, he said, still looking at Serafina. Your daughter is considerably more interesting than you led me to believe. She's willful, Your Majesty, the Duke said quickly, but she can be broken. I give you full authority to, you give me nothing. Now Lucian did look at the Duke, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You are a gambling addict who has squandered 3 fortunes, buried 3 wives under suspicious circumstances, and whose remaining wealth exists only because I've allowed your pathetic establishments to remain open in my territory. You came to me because you had nowhere else to turn, no other way to satisfy the debts you've accumulated. And you offered me your daughter as if she were a horse being sold at market. The Duke's face went white, then red. Your Majesty, I meant... I should kill you for the insult alone. Lucian rose from his throne in a single fluid movement, descending the dais steps with that predatory grace. Bringing me a woman in chains, as if I were some brutish merchant in need of slaves. Do you know how many women would volunteer to enter my household? How many noble families would consider it an honor? He stopped beside Serafina, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold that radiated from his body, could see the way his chest didn't move because he didn't need to breathe. But then again, Lucian continued, reaching out to touch one of Serafina's chains, perhaps you've accidentally given me something valuable after all. Not because she's beautiful, though she is, not because she's educated, though clearly her governess was competent, but because she has spine. His fingers brushed her jaw, tilting her face toward the light. His touch was cold but not unpleasant, like marble that had been kept in shadow. Tell me, Lady Serafina, he said quietly, if I freed you from these chains right now and told you to leave, what would you do? The question hung in the air between them. Serafina felt her father's desperate gaze boring into her back, felt the weight of her younger sister's futures pressing on her shoulders. If she left, the Duke's debts would remain unpaid. He would lose everything. And her 3 sisters, sweet Margaret, clever Eloise, gentle Jane, would be cast out into the world with nothing, vulnerable to every predator who preyed on penniless noblewomen. I would ask, she said carefully, what would happen to my family if I left? Your father would be ruined, his estates forfeit, his daughters left penniless. Then I would stay. Even though I could drain you dry before the sun rises? Even though I could make you my personal blood source? Could keep you in a cell and feed from you until you're nothing but a husk? Serafina met those burning red eyes directly. You could, but you won't. And why is that? Because you didn't build an empire lasting 4 centuries by being wasteful or stupid. If you wanted a simple blood source, you would have accepted one of the dozens of volunteers you just mentioned. You accepted my father's offer because something about it interested you. Either the novelty of the transaction or something specific about me that your spies reported. She paused. And because a king who burns cities for his sister's sake doesn't strike me as someone who casually tortures innocent women for sport. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to crumble beneath her feet. Then Lucian threw back his head and laughed. It was a genuine laugh, rich and dark as aged wine, and it transformed his face from beautiful to stunning. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "Duke Ashford," he said, "your debt is paid. Leave my castle before I remember why I dislike you." "Your Majesty," the Duke's voice cracked, "but the girl—" "Becomes my ward under my protection. The contract is fulfilled. Go." Serafina heard her father's footsteps retreating across the marble, heard the great doors boom shut, and then she was alone with the Vampire King, still wearing silver chains that had begun to make her wrists bleed. Lucian noticed her glancing at the chains. With a casual gesture, he touched them, and they dissolved into smoke and silver dust that scattered across the floor. "Witch-forged silver," he explained, "meant to suppress any latent magical abilities. Your father claimed you had none, but he's a liar and a fool, so I took precautions." He studied her carefully. "Do you have magic, Serafina?" "Not that I know of." "Interesting." The chains left marks. He took her wrist gently, examining the burned skin. Silver burns vampires. It also burns certain magical bloodlines, particularly witches and their descendants. Serafina stared at the angry red welts circling her wrists. "My mother died when I was born. I know nothing about her family. Then, perhaps, we'll both be learning things about you in the days to come." Lucian released her wrist and stepped back, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "I'm going to make you an unusual proposition, Lady Serafina. You can accept or refuse. The choice is genuinely yours. But before you answer, you should understand several things about your situation." He began to pace, his movements hypnotic in their fluid grace. "First, you're correct that I didn't accept your father's offer because I need a blood source or a servant. I have plenty of both. Second, your research was admirably thorough, but incomplete. My sister wasn't just killed by hunters. She was betrayed by someone in this castle, someone close to the royal family. I've spent 80 years trying to identify the traitor." Serafina's breath caught. "You think they're still here?" "I know they are. Whoever orchestrated Valentina's death is patient, clever, and has access to the inner workings of my court. They've remained hidden for 8 decades, waiting for something. Another opportunity, perhaps, or the right moment to strike again." "Why are you telling me this?" Lucian stopped pacing and faced her directly. "Because I need someone I can trust absolutely. Someone who has no existing loyalties in this castle, no secret allegiances to any of the vampire houses or noble families. Someone intelligent enough to move through my court and observe what I cannot see from my throne. Someone who understands that their survival depends entirely on my survival." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "You want me to be your spy." "I want you to be my weapon," he corrected. "My eyes and ears in places I cannot go. My presence at events where the king would silence all interesting conversation. I want you to befriend my courtiers, earn their trust, and discover which of them betrayed my sister." His red eyes glittered. "And in exchange, I will give you something no woman in your position has ever possessed." What? Power. The word hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. Serafina's mind raced through the implications. What he offered was dangerous beyond measure. Inserting herself into vampire politics, hunting a traitor clever enough to evade the king himself for 80 years, playing a role among creatures who could kill her with a thought. But the alternative was returning to her father's house, watching her sisters married off to whoever would take them without dowry, living as a dependent on whatever crumbs of charity the Duke could scrape together. Or worse, being sold again to someone who wouldn't even pretend to see her as human. "What kind of power?" she asked. Lucian smiled that wolf's smile again. "Every kind you can seize. I'll have you trained in combat, in poisons, in the secret languages of the vampire houses. I'll teach you myself how to move through shadow and read the subtle tells that reveal a liar. I'll give you access to my library, which contains knowledge that human scholars would kill to possess. I'll dress you in silks and jewels, present you as a favored member of my household, make you untouchable to everyone except me." He took a step closer. "And if you succeed, if you help me identify my sister's murderer, I'll grant you a boon of your choosing. Land, wealth, titles, magical artifacts, the destruction of your enemies, name it. And if it's within my power to grant, I will. And if I refuse, then I'll return you to your father's house with enough gold to provide dowries for all your sisters and clear his remaining debts. You'll never see me again." He tilted his head. "But you won't refuse. You sound very certain." "I am, because I saw it in your eyes the moment you walked into this room, even terrified and in chains. You're hungry, Serafina. Hungry for more than the small life that society would give you. Hungry for agency, for choice, for the chance to be something other than someone's daughter or wife or property." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm offering you the chance to be dangerous, to matter, to reshape your own destiny." He was right, damn him. He'd read her perfectly, seen the ambition she'd tried to bury under layers of dutiful daughterhood and appropriate feminine behavior. All her life, she'd been told to be small, to be quiet, to accept whatever scraps of life men decided to toss her way. And now, here stood a monster offering her the chance to be something else entirely. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I need guarantees. I need to know that you won't use me and then dispose of me when I'm no longer useful. I need insurance." "Name your terms." "A blood oath. Not the kind where you take my blood, the kind where we're both bound. If you betray me or deliberately put me in danger without warning, you suffer consequences. And when I succeed in finding your traitor, you grant my boon immediately and completely, with no tricks or technicalities." Something like approval flickered in Lucian's eyes. "You know about blood oaths." "I read about them in a very old book about vampire marriage customs." "Clever girl. Blood oaths of equal binding are rare. They require trust on both sides. Each party gives the other power over them." He considered for a long moment. "Very well, I accept your terms." He drew a small knife from his belt, the blade gleaming in the candlelight. Before Serafina could second-guess herself, he drew it across his palm. Black blood welled up, darker than human blood, thick as oil. "Your turn," he said, offering her the blade. Seraphina took it with steady hands and cut her own palm, gasping at the sharp pain. Red blood bloomed against her skin, bright and very human. Lucian pressed his palm to hers. The moment their blood mingled, power surged through her body like lightning, like drowning, like being set on fire from the inside out. She heard herself cry out, felt her knees buckle, and then Lucia's arm was around her waist, holding her upright as the magic seared through her veins. "I, Lucian Nightshade, King of the Shadow Territories and Lord of House Nightshade, do bind myself to Lady Seraphina Ashford by blood and oath," he intoned, his voice resonating with power that made the air shimmer. "I vow to protect her from deliberate harm, to honor the terms of our agreement, and to grant her boon when she fulfills her task. Should I break this oath, may my blood turn to poison in my veins." Seraphina forced words through lips that felt numb. "I, Seraphina Ashford, do bind myself to Lucian Nightshade by blood and oath. I vow to serve his interests faithfully, to hunt his enemies with all my skill, and to speak truth to him in private. Should I break this oath, may my heart cease beating." The magic flared bright and hot between their clasped hands, and then it was on. They pulled apart, and Seraphina stared at her palm in wonder. The cut had healed completely, leaving only a thin silver scar that matched the one she could see on Lucian's hand. "Now we're bound," Lucian said quietly. "For better or worse, your fate is tied to mine until this matter is resolved." Seraphina looked up at the Vampire King. Her king now, in a way more profound than any feudal arrangement. "Then you'd better start training me, Your Majesty, because I intend to catch your traitor." "Oh, I know you will," Lucian replied, and his smile was equal parts pride and threat. "Welcome to Nighthaven, Lady Seraphina. Try not to die." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of bruises, exhaustion, and knowledge that poured into Seraphina's mind until she thought her skull might crack from the pressure. Lucian hadn't been exaggerating when he promised to train her. Each morning, before the sun had fully risen, she met with Master Corvus, a vampire who'd been a soldier in some ancient war, and who seemed to view teaching combat as equivalent to teaching dance. Within days, her body had learned to move in ways she'd never imagined, dodging strikes that came too fast to see, learning to use an opponent's strength against them, understanding that the best weapon was often the one your enemy didn't expect. "You're small and human," Corvus told her while she lay gasping on the training room floor after he'd thrown her for the dozenth time. "You'll never match a vampire for speed or strength, so you have to be smarter, more vicious, willing to strike at vulnerabilities they won't defend because they've grown arrogant." She'd proven his point the next day by feinting high and then driving her practice knife toward his groin. He'd blocked it, barely, and laughed with genuine delight. "Good, that's the instinct you need. No honor, no fairness, just survival." Afternoons were for learning the labyrinthine politics of the vampire court. Lady Morgana, an ancient vampire with silver hair and eyes like ice chips, drilled her relentlessly on the histories of the 12 vampire houses, their alliances and feuds, their weaknesses and ambitions. "House Draven controls the Eastern Mountains and the silver mines," Morgana would snap. "What's their relationship with House Nightshade?" "Strained but stable," Seraphina would respond. "Lord Draven wanted to marry Princess Valentina before she died. The king refused, considering Draven's bloodline tainted by werewolf ancestry. Draven took offense, but hasn't openly opposed Nightshade rule. Possible traitor? Possible, but unlikely." He left court for his mountain estates 10 years before Valentina's death and hasn't returned since. Good. Next, House Ravencroft. And so it went, hour after hour, until Serafina could recite the genealogies and grievances of every major vampire bloodline in her sleep. Evenings belonged to Lucian himself. He would summon her to his private study, a round room at the top of the castle's highest tower, lined floor to ceiling with books and maps and artifacts that hummed with residual magic. There, he taught her things that made her previous education seem like children's games. Magic leaves traces, he explained one night, holding up a crystal that glowed faintly blue. This stone was near a powerful spell 300 years ago, and it still remembers. Everything remembers: stones, bones, blood, air itself. The trick is learning to see those memories. He pressed the crystal into her palm, and suddenly her mind flooded with images. A circle of hooded figures, chanting in a language she didn't know. Power rising like a tide. She dropped the crystal with a gasp. Lucian caught it before it hit the floor. "The castle is full of such echoes," he said. "Centuries of magic soaked into every stone. Most vampires ignore it because they were taught to dismiss human magical traditions as weak. But human magic and vampire magic come from the same source, just different branches of the same tree. Your witch-blood ancestry, dormant though it may be, gives you sensitivity others lack." "I still don't understand how I have witch-blood," Serafina admitted. "My father's family line is documented back 12 generations, all human nobles, and he never speaks of my mother's people." "Then perhaps that's your first real investigation," Lucian suggested. "Before you can hunt my enemies, know yourself. Find out who your mother was, what bloodline she came from. The castle library has birth records for every noble family in the territories. Start there." So she did. Late at night, when the castle settled into its deepest hours, Serafina would take a candle down to the vast library and pull records from dusty shelves, searching for any mention of her mother's maiden name, Catherine Morwen. The name appeared rarely in the records, always with tantalizing fragments. Morwen, minor noble house, estates in the borderlands, bloodline rumored to have witch ancestry. Family decimated in the Hunter Purges of 1802. Last known survivor, Catherine, married to Duke Ashford of Greystone. The Hunter Purges. Serafina found references to them scattered through multiple histories, but the accounts were frustratingly vague. Apparently, 50 years ago, a fanatical group of vampire hunters had swept through the borderlands, slaughtering not just vampires, but anyone with magical bloodlines, witches, fey-touched, even humans who showed unusual abilities. The vampire lords had eventually crushed the hunters, but not before hundreds had died, including, it seems, nearly all of the Morwen family. "My mother survived," Serafina murmured to herself, tracing her finger over the faded text. "She married my father, had me, and died in childbirth. But why would a witch-blooded noblewoman marry a gambling addict from a declining house? Perhaps she had no choice." Serafina spun, heart hammering, to find Lady Morgana standing in the library doorway. The ancient vampire moved with such silence that she could appear like a ghost. "Lady Morgana," Serafina said, pressing a hand to her chest, "you startled me." "I often do. It's one of my few remaining pleasures." Morgana glided closer, her pale gaze fixed on the record book. "Researching your mother. Wise. The king was right to suggest it." "You knew he suggested it?" "I know everything that happens in this castle. It's my purpose." Morgana tapped the page with one sharp fingernail. "Catherine Morwen. I remember her, vaguely." She came to court once, shortly after her marriage, seeking an audience with King Lucian. He was occupied with the werewolf treaties at the time and couldn't see her. She left and never returned. Serafina straightened. She sought an audience with the king? Why? That I don't know, but if you truly wish to understand your heritage, you should speak with the archivist, not the castle librarian, the other one. There's another archivist? Morgana's smile was thin as a knife blade. In the East Tower, the locked section. You'll need the king's permission to enter, but if you ask, he'll grant it, assuming you're brave enough to face what's kept there. Before Serafina could ask what that meant, Morgana had glided away, leaving only the faint scent of lilies and old parchment. The next evening, Serafina approached Lucian in his study. He looked up from the map he'd been annotating, one eyebrow rising in question. "The East Tower Archives," she said without preamble. "Lady Morgana said I need your permission to enter." "She did she?" Lucian set down his pen, studying Serafina with that unnerving focus. The East Tower contains records of the Hunter purges, testimonies, lists of the dead, evidence of the atrocities committed. I keep it locked because some of my court would prefer that history be forgotten. It makes them uncomfortable to remember that we failed to protect our magical allies when they needed us most. My mother's family was killed in those purges. I know. I reviewed your mother's petition after you started researching her. Catherine Morwen came to my court seeking asylum for the last survivors of her house, a younger brother and 2 cousins. I was away negotiating peace with the werewolf clans, trying to prevent an entirely different massacre. By the time I returned and read her petition, it was too late. The Hunters had found her family and killed them. Guilt flickered across his face, brief but genuine. I failed your mother, Serafina.
I don't fail often, but when I do, I remember. You may access the East Tower Archives, learn what you need to learn. But be warned, the archivist is not entirely sane anymore, and the records themselves contain horrors. I can handle horrors, Your Majesty. Can you? Well, see. He gave her a key that felt ice-cold against her palm, and the next morning, Serafina climbed the winding stairs of the East Tower alone. The door at the top was iron-bound and covered in silver sigils that made her witch-marked wrists tingle. The key turned smoothly, and the door swung open to reveal a vast circular room filled with shelves, cabinets, and tables covered in documents. And hunched over one table, surrounded by scattered tapers, was a vampire so ancient that his skin had turned translucent, revealing the dark veins beneath. His hair was white as bone, his eyes milky with cataracts. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through a crypt. "Living blood," he rasped. "I smell living blood. Who disturbs the memory keeper?" "Lady Serafina Ashford, under authority of the king. Are you the archivist?" "I was. I am. I will be." The ancient vampire's head swiveled toward her with unnatural precision. "What does the king's new pet seek in the halls of the dead?" Serafina forced herself to approach the table, to stand within reach of those gnarled hands. "I seek information about the Morwen family, about what happened to them during the Hunter purges." "Morwen." The word was a sigh. "Yes, I remember. They screamed so beautifully when they burned." Ice water ran down Serafina's spine. "You were there. I documented. That's my purpose, to witness and remember what others would forget." The archivist shuffled through papers with trembling hands. Here. The Morwen Estate, Borderlands, March 17, 1802. Hunters arrived at dawn. 6 family members present. Lord Morwen, his 2 sons, a daughter, and 2 nieces. They barricaded themselves in the manor house.
The Hunters burned it. His milky eyes found hers. Only one escaped. Catherine, the eldest daughter. She had left the previous day to meet with a suitor. She returned to find ash and bones. Seraphina's throat felt tight. And then she ran, came here, begging the king for protection, for justice, for anything. But the king was away, and his council deemed the matter under investigation. By the time they acted, Catherine had vanished, married in haste to some minor duke, presumably for protection. "My father," Seraphina whispered. "Your father." The archivist cocked his head. "And now you're here, the daughter of ash and vengeance, wearing silver marks and blood oaths. Patterns repeat, girl. History circles back. The hunters who killed your mother's family were never truly caught." "What do you mean?" "I read that the king's forces killed them. They killed the foot soldiers, yes, burned the farm boys' zealots and poor mad fools. But the one who led them, who planned the attacks, who had maps of where every witch-blooded family lived." The archivist's smile showed teeth like yellow needles. "That one vanished. Some say they died. Some say they went into hiding. Some say they're still here, waiting." The room felt suddenly colder. "Here? In the castle? Ask your king. He's been hunting the same ghost I have." The archivist turned back to his papers. The one who betrayed Princess Valentina to the hunters. The one who knew she'd be traveling under Peace Banner, who knew her route, who sent her into their waiting trap. Understanding crashed over Seraphina like a wave. They're the same person, the hunter leader and the king's traitor. Clever girl, yes. Someone in this castle has been protecting hunters, feeding them information, arranging convenient deaths for 80 years. Your mother's family, the king's sister, others. Always carefully, always leaving no proof. Who? If I knew, they'd be dead. The archivist's laugh was dry as falling leaves. "But perhaps you'll discover what I couldn't. You have advantages I lack. Youth, health, the king's trust, and witch blood. That might be the key, if you can learn to unlock it." "I don't know how." "Then learn. The castle remembers, the stones remember. Let them teach you." He waved a dismissive hand. "Now go. You smell too alive, and it makes me hungry." Seraphina fled down the tower stairs, her mind reeling. By the time she reached the ground floor, she'd made a decision. She found Lucian in the training yard, watching Corvus drill a group of young vampires. When he saw her expression, he dismissed them with a gesture and waited. "Your sister's death and my mother's family's murder are connected," Seraphina said without preamble. "The same person orchestrated both. Someone here has been protecting hunters and feeding them information for decades." "I know," Lucian replied calmly. "I've known for years. What I don't know is who." "Then we hunt them together. Really hunt them. Not me sneaking around while you sit on your throne, but both of us actively investigating." "That's not how this works. I'm the king. I can't be seen to." "Then you'll never find them." Frustration made her voice sharp. "Because they know how you operate. They've been evading you for 80 years because they understand your patterns, your limitations. But they don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of, because neither do I yet. And they certainly won't expect the king to be working with a human girl in ways that break every protocol." Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then, surprising her, he smiled. "You're right. I've been playing this game by the same rules for too long, and my enemy has learned to counter every move. Perhaps it's time to change the rules entirely." He stepped closer, and there was something dangerous in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken. "But if we do this, if we truly hunt together, you need to understand what that means." "It means going places the king's ward shouldn't go. attending events in disguise, possibly pretending to be something you're not to gain access to certain circles. What kind of circles? The kind where vampires discuss things they'd never say in front of the king. His hand came up to touch her face, gentle as a whisper. It would require you to play a role, to be seen as mine in a way more intimate than ward or servant. Understanding dawned. You want me to pretend to be your lover. Not pretend. Not entirely. His thumb traced her jawline. The blood oath bound us, Serafina, but bonds can be deepened. If you were to drink my blood, just a small amount, it would create a resonance between us. I would be able to sense when you're in danger, and you would gain some limited access to vampire abilities, speed, strength, heightened senses. Would it turn me into a vampire? No, that requires death and rebirth. This would be different, a partial bond that would make you something between human and vampire. My court would recognize you as under my protection in the most absolute way possible. No one would dare harm you without directly challenging me. And the cost? The cost, Lucien said quietly, is that the bond goes both ways. You would feel my emotions just as I'd feel yours. We'd be linked, Serafina, in a way that's extremely rare even among vampires. I don't offer this lightly. Serafina's mind raced through the implications. What he offered was power, but also vulnerability, protection, but also intimacy that terrified her. And yet, if I agree, she said, it's not just for the investigation. I want to learn to use whatever abilities the bond gives me. I want to become truly dangerous. Oh, you're already dangerous, Lucien murmured. But yes, I'll train you to be lethal. Is that a yes? She looked up at the vampire king, beautiful and terrible, and offering her a chance to be something more than human, more than a discarded daughter, more than a piece in someone else's game. Yes, she said. Lucien's eyes flared brilliant red. Then we seal the bond tonight. Meet me in my chambers after moonrise. The hours until moonrise felt like years. Serafina bathed and dressed in the finest gown she'd been given, deep crimson silk that made her pale skin seem luminous, and tried not to think about what she was agreeing to. Not the drinking of blood, which was merely grotesque, but the emotional vulnerability, the stripping away of barriers between herself and a creature who'd lived for centuries and seen empires rise and fall. When she finally climbed the tower stairs to Lucien's private chambers, her hands were steady, but her heart hammered like a war drum. He was waiting by the window, silhouetted against the silver moon, still dressed in black, but with his shirt open at the collar. When he turned to face her, something in his expression made her breath catch. Not hunger or cruelty, but something almost like nervousness. Last chance to refuse, he said quietly. Once this is done, it cannot undone. We'll be bound until one of us dies. I know. Serafina crossed the room to stand before him. I'm not afraid. Liar. You're terrified. I can hear your heart trying to break through your ribs. Being afraid doesn't mean I won't do it. That earned her a slight smile. True courage, then. Rare. He gestured to a velvet chair. Sit. This will be easier if you're comfortable. She sat, and Lucien knelt before her, the vampire king on his knees, which somehow made the moment feel more ceremonial than seductive. He took her hand gently. The blood bond requires exchange, he explained. I'll give you my blood first, then take a small amount of yours. The process will hurt. Vampire blood is transformative, and your body will resist the change. But I'll be here the entire time. How much will it hurt? Less than dying, more than anything you've experienced. His honesty was almost comforting. Ready? Serafina nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucien raised his wrist to his mouth and bit down. Black blood welled up, and he offered it to her. Drink, just a few swallows. She pressed her lips to his cold skin and drank. The blood tasted like metal and winter nights, and something ancient that had no name. It burned down her throat like liquid fire, and then the real pain began. Her body convulsed. Every nerve ending ignited simultaneously. She felt her bones elongating, her muscles tearing and reforming, her senses exploding outward until she could hear every heartbeat in the castle, smell every drop of blood, see every shadow and light source with crystalline clarity. Lucien's arms were around her, holding her through the transformation, his voice in her ear speaking words in a language older than Latin. The bond between them snapped into place like a bridge being built across an abyss, and suddenly she could feel him, feel the centuries of loneliness and loss, the weight of responsibility and power, the carefully hidden fear that he would never find his sister's killer. And beneath it all, a spark of something unexpected, hope. Hope that she might be what he'd been searching for. The pain receded gradually, leaving her gasping in his arms. When she could finally open her eyes, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, and she could see the faint traces of magic that hung in the air like cobwebs made of light. "Look at me," Lucien commanded softly. She turned her head, and their eyes met. His were still red, but now she could see the layers in them, scarlet and crimson and ruby, and shades she had no names for. And she knew with absolute certainty that he was looking at her with the same new depth of vision. "Your turn," she whispered. He nodded and bent to her throat. His fangs pierced her skin with surgical precision, and the sensation was nothing like she'd expected. Not painful, but intimate, invasive, as if he were reading her soul through her blood. She felt him taste her fear and her courage, her ambition and her compassion, her rage at her father and her love for her sisters. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide. "You're stronger than I thought. Your witch blood isn't dormant, it's sleeping. And now that vampire blood runs in your veins, it's beginning to wake." Serafina touched her throat and found the puncture wounds already healing. "I feel different, like I'm more myself than I've ever been." "That's the bond. It strips away pretense." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Try moving." She took a step and gasped. She'd moved faster than humanly possible, crossing half the room in a blur. "I'm fast." "Not as fast as a full vampire, but faster than any human. And stronger. Try this." He tossed her a heavy book, one that should have required 2 hands to lift. She caught it one-handed, effortlessly. The weight that should have pulled her arm down felt like nothing. "Your senses are enhanced," Lucien continued, moving to stand beside her. "And you now have access to minor shadow walking, the ability to move through darkness undetected. It will take practice, but combined with your human intuition and witch blood, you've become something unique." "What am I?" "Something new, something that's never existed before." He took the book from her and set it aside. "And something that's now bound to me in ways that will terrify my court. When they realize what we've done, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind where certain members of my court will see you as a threat to their power, where others will try to use you against me, where the traitor we're hunting will realize you're dangerous and may try to eliminate you before you uncover them." His hand found hers, and through the bond, she felt his determination like steel. "But we'll face it together." Through the bond, through their mingled blood, Serafina felt the truth of his words. This wasn't just an alliance anymore. It was partnership, dependency, something that transcended the simple categories of king and subject, vampire and human. "Then we'd better start hunting," she said. The next morning, Lady Morgana appeared at Seraphina's door with a dress that was more weapon than garment. Midnight blue silk with a corset reinforced with silver thread and cunningly concealed pockets for knives, poisons, and other useful tools. "The king informed me of your new status," Morgana said, her ice-chip eyes gleaming with something that might have been approval. "The court will know by tonight. Lord Draven is visiting from the mountains, and the king is hosting a feast in his honor. You'll be presented as the king's blood-bonded companion." That quickly? Strike while the iron is hot, girl. Draven is here because he wants something. Probably permission to expand his silver mining operations into disputed territory. He'll be vulnerable, eager to please, and if he had anything to do with Princess Valentina's death, seeing you at the king's side might rattle him enough to reveal something. Seraphina absorbed this. What else do I need to know about Draven? He's old, nearly as old as the king. Powerful, but provincial, more comfortable with mining operations than court intrigue. His house has werewolf blood mixed in from 3 generations back, which some of the purer bloodlines hold against him. He wanted to marry Valentina to legitimize his house's position. Morgana's expression was unreadable. The king refused. Some say it was prejudice against Draven's mixed blood. Others say Lucian simply didn't trust him. Do you think Draven could be the traitor? I think everyone could be the traitor, until proven otherwise.
Morgana moved to Seraphina's window, looking out over the castle grounds. But I'll tell you something that's not in any official record. The day before Valentina left on her fatal journey, Draven was at court. He had a private meeting with her, asked her to reconsider the king's rejection, to plead his case one more time. She refused. He left the castle in a rage. And then she was killed by hunters who knew exactly where she'd be. Precisely. Morgana turned back to face her. Tonight, you watch Draven, study him. The king will be occupied with formal hosting duties, but you can move freely, speak casually, observe reactions. Use that new speed to be where you shouldn't be. Use those enhanced senses to catch whispered conversations. Spy work. The work you agreed to do. Morgana's voice softened fractionally. The king trusts you, girl. Don't waste it. And don't get killed. I've grown accustomed to having someone interesting in the castle. The feast that night was magnificent and terrible. The great hall blazed with candlelight. Long tables groaned under the weight of food, meant more for display than consumption. Vampires could eat but rarely bothered. And the assembled court glittered with jewels and silk and barely concealed ambition. Seraphina entered on Lucian's arm, and the reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-word. Every head turned. She felt the weight of hundreds of vampire gazes, felt their shock and calculation, and, in some cases, fury. "Steady," Lucian murmured, the word barely audible. Through the bond, she felt his amusement and pride. Let them stare. He led her to the high table, seating her at his right hand, the position traditionally reserved for the king's consort or most honored guest. The message was unmistakable. Lord Draven sat across from them, his expression carefully neutral. He was a massive vampire with iron-gray hair and eyes the color of amber, dressed in furs despite the warmth of the hall.
When he spoke, his voice carried the rough accent of the mountain territories. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head, "you honor me with this feast, and surprise me with your new companion." "Lady Seraphina Ashford," Lucian replied smoothly, "my blood-bonded partner. Seraphina, Lord Draven of the Eastern Mountains." Seraphina met Draven's amber gaze directly, using her new senses to read his micro-expressions. Surprise, definitely. Suspicion. And beneath it, a flicker of something that might have been fear. "Lord Draven," she said, "I've heard much about your house. The king speaks highly of your loyalty during the werewolf conflicts." "Does he?" Draven's eyes flicked to Lucian, then back to her. "How generous of His Majesty. I've heard nothing about you, Lady Ashford, which is strange for someone who's achieved such sudden prominence." The words were polite, but the undertone was clear. "Who are you, and why should I care?" "I prefer to let my actions speak rather than my reputation," Serafina replied, "though I understand you preferred the opposite approach when courting Princess Valentina. All reputation, no action that persuaded her of your worth." The table went silent. Several vampires inhaled sharply. Lord Draven's face darkened. "Serafina," Lucian said mildly, though through the bond she felt his approval, "perhaps we shouldn't discuss painful history at a feast." "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I thought honesty was valued at your court." She turned back to Draven. "My understanding was that the princess rejected your suit because she questioned your loyalty, not your bloodline. Something about conflicting interests between vampire prosperity and your house's mining operations." Draven's hands clenched on the table. "The princess was misinformed. My operations have only ever served the kingdom's interests." "Of course," Serafina smiled. "I meant no offense. I'm simply fascinated by the princess's death and the events leading up to it." "As the king's partner, I consider it my duty to understand the threats to his family." "There are no threats," Draven said tightly. "The hunters who killed Princess Valentina were destroyed. The foot soldiers were. But their leader was never caught, were they?" She tilted her head. "I've been reading the old reports. Fascinating how the hunters knew the princess's exact route, her schedule, even which roads would be unguarded that day. Almost as if someone close to the royal family fed them information." Lord Draven stood abruptly. "Your Majesty, I don't appreciate your companion's insinuations." "Then perhaps you shouldn't have left the court in rage the day before my sister was killed," Lucian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Perhaps you shouldn't have had that final meeting with her where you threatened to make her regret rejecting you." "I never." Draven's face went white. "I said I would prove my worth to her, that she would regret not accepting when I became indispensable to the kingdom. I meant economically, through my mines." "Did you?" Serafina watched his expression carefully, using her enhanced senses to track his heartbeat, his breathing, the minute muscle tensions that betrayed emotion. "Because from where I'm sitting, that sounds like a threat." "I loved Valentina." The words burst from Draven like a dam breaking. "I would never have harmed her. When I heard she was dead, He stopped, breathing hard. I destroyed half my manor in grief. Ask anyone who was there. I mourned her for decades." Serafina felt the truth in his words, heard the genuine anguish in his voice. Through the bond, she sent Lucian her assessment. "Not the traitor. The grief is real." Lucian's response was wordless agreement. He gestured for Draven to sit. "Forgive the interrogation, old friend, but you must understand that after 80 years, I trust no one. Except, apparently, the woman at my side, who has no reason to lie to me."
Draven sank back into his chair, looking suddenly older. "I understand. If I could find the one who betrayed Valentina, I would kill them myself. She was kind to me, even in rejection. She deserved better than to die screaming while hunters burned her alive." "She did," Lucian agreed quietly. "Now, shall we discuss why you're actually here?
Something about mining rights? The rest of the feast passed with less drama, though Serafina felt eyes on her constantly. She used her enhanced hearing to eavesdrop on conversations happening at other tables, catching fragments that she filed away for later analysis. Blood bonded to a human, unprecedented. Father was Duke Ashford, the gambling fool. Witch blood, I can smell it on her. King's lost his mind, making her his equal. When the feast finally ended and they retired to Lucian's study, Serafina kicked off her uncomfortable formal shoes with relief. "Draven's not our traitor," she said immediately. "I know. I felt your certainty through the bond." Lucian poured himself a glass of deep red wine, or at least she hoped it was wine. "Which means we're back to searching, though you made excellent progress tonight." "Progress? You rattled the court, made them aware that you're not decorative, that you're actively investigating. Now they'll be nervous, wondering what you know, who you'll question next." He smiled. "Nervous people make mistakes. Or they strike first to eliminate the threat. That too, which is why you won't be going anywhere alone from now on." He moved to his desk, pulling out a small leather case. "Lady Morgana asked me to give you these, training tools," she called them. Serafina opened the case to find an array of small vials, each labeled in neat script. Nightshade extract, silver dust, basilisk venom, wolfsbane tincture, and half a dozen others. "Poisons," she said. "The vampire's tools." "Were difficult to kill directly, so we've perfected the art of subtle assassination. Morgana will teach you which works on which bloodlines, how to administer them undetected, and more importantly, how to defend against them." Lucian's expression was serious. "Because if our traitor realizes you're a threat, poison will likely be their first choice. It can kill even a blood-bonded human." The casual mention of her potential death should have frightened her. Instead, Serafina felt a fierce determination rising. "Then I'd better learn quickly." Over the next month, Serafina's education in death continued. Morgana taught her to recognize the subtle scent of poison in wine, the faint discoloration it caused in silver cups, the way to test food by watching how quickly flies died on it. She learned which herbs counteracted which toxins, how to induce vomiting if caught early enough, and the grim truth that some poisons had no antidote, only faster or slower ways to die. Meanwhile, Corvus intensified her combat training. With her enhanced speed and strength from the blood bond, she could now move fast enough to surprise even younger vampires. She would never match a vampire lord in raw power, but she learned to be unpredictable, to use weapons they wouldn't expect, to target vulnerabilities most vampires didn't bother defending. "You're a snake among lions," Corvus told her after she'd managed to land a practice knife against his throat for the first time. "Small, fast, venomous. They'll underestimate you right until the moment you strike." But the most valuable lessons came from moving through the court itself. As Lucian's acknowledged companion, Serafina gained access to spaces and conversations previously closed to her. She attended council meetings where ancient vampire lords argued about territory and resources. She walked through the castle's lower levels where servants gossiped. She visited the barracks where the king's guards trained and drank and let slip secrets they'd never speak in front of their commander. And slowly, painstakingly, she began to piece together a pattern. 3 vampires, she told Lucian one evening, spreading papers across his desk. 3 who were present at court when Valentina died, who had access to her travel plans, and who are still alive and active today. Lucian leaned over the desk, studying her notes. Lady Isadora of House Ravencroft, Lord Silas of House Thornwood,
and Count Matthias of House Duskborn. Isadora was Valentina's lady-in-waiting, Serafina explained. She'd know every detail of the princess's schedule. Silas commanded the Eastern Guard. He'd know which routes would be unguarded when. And Matthias was my closest friend, Lucian finished, his voice hollow. My advisor, my confidant. I told him everything, which means he'd know exactly how to feed information to hunters without being detected. Serafina touched his hand, feeling his anguish through the bond. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're doing what I asked. But his pain was a living thing between them, sharp and bitter. Matthias. Gods, if it's Matthias. We don't know that it is. It could be any of them or none of them. I need more evidence. She pulled out another document. But there's something else. All three have one thing in common. They all benefited from Valentina's death. Lucian looked up sharply. Explain. Isadora was promoted to head of the Queen's Guard after Valentina died, a position that didn't exist before, created specifically for her. Silas was given command of the Northern Territories, which had been under consideration for Valentina to govern. And Matthias, she hesitated. Say it. Matthias was named your heir apparent in your will, the document you drafted 3 months after Valentina's death, when you were grieving and convinced you'd eventually fall in battle. If you die without children, House Duskborn inherits the Nightshade throne. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Lucian moved, so fast she barely saw him, sweeping all the papers off his desk in a violent gesture. 80 years, he said, his voice shaking. 80 years I've been working with him, trusting him, considering him family. And he might have orchestrated my sister's murder to position himself as my heir. We don't know that for certain, Serafina said urgently. It's circumstantial. We need proof. Then we get proof. Lucian's eyes burned scarlet. I don't care what it takes or how long. We investigate all 3 of them until we find the truth. But investigating vampire lords turned out to be considerably more difficult than researching dead history. Isadora, Silas, and Matthias were all careful, intelligent, and experienced in court intrigue. They left no obvious trails, made no careless mistakes, and remained perfectly loyal in every observable way. Weeks passed with frustratingly little progress. Serafina attended functions where Isadora was present, trying to catch inconsistencies in her stories about Valentina. She spoke with guards who'd served under Silas, looking for evidence that he'd deliberately left routes unguarded. She even attempted to befriend Matthias, joining him for wine and conversation, probing delicately at his memories of the period around Valentina's death. All 3 were cordial, careful, and gave away nothing. We're approaching this wrong, Serafina finally said one frustrated evening. We're investigating like humans, looking for direct evidence, obvious connections. But they're vampires. They've had centuries to perfect deception. What do you suggest? Lucian asked. We use magic. You said the castle remembers, that everything leaves traces. My witch blood is waking up. I can see the magical residue now, feel it in certain places. What if we go to the place where Valentina died? What if the stones there remember what happened? Lucian was quiet for a long moment. The site was destroyed. After we killed the hunters, I had the entire area razed. I couldn't bear leaving it standing. But the earth remains. Blood soaked into soil doesn't forget, does it? You told me that yourself. No, he admitted, it doesn't. But traveling to the borderlands, to that specific site, would mean leaving the castle for days. It would be dangerous. Everything we're doing is dangerous. Serafina moved to stand before him, taking both his hands. We're not getting anywhere here. Maybe we need to go to where it began.
Through the bond, she felt his resistance warring with his desperate need for answers. Finally, he nodded. "We'll go, but not alone. I'll bring a small guard." And Serafina, his grip on her hands tightened. "If we discover the truth out there, if we find evidence that points to one of my oldest companions, I don't know if I can bear it." "You can," she said softly, "because you already have been for 80 years. At least this way, you'll know." They left 3 days later, as dawn broke gray and cold over the castle. Lucian, Serafina, and 4 of the king's most trusted guards rode out through the eastern gates, heading toward the borderlands where Valentina had died. The journey took 5 days. They traveled through increasingly wild territory, passing from vampire-controlled lands into the disputed border regions where human settlements mixed uneasily with supernatural territories. Serafina saw her first werewolf pack from a distance, magnificent and terrifying, moving through the forest like gray shadows. She saw a witch's cottage marked with protective sigils that made her witch blood sing in recognition. She saw the ruins of hunter camps, still marked with the scorch marks where vampire fire had consumed them. On the 6th day, they reached the place. It was a clearing in the forest, unremarkable except for the fact that nothing grew there. The earth was bare and black, as if burned, though no fire had touched it in 80 years. The trees surrounding the clearing were twisted and dead, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. "This is it," Lucian said, his voice hollow. He dismounted and stood at the clearing's edge, staring at the dead earth. "This is where they burned her." Serafina slid from her horse and approached the clearing. The moment her feet touched the blackened soil, power surged through her. Not the controlled power of the blood bond, but something wild and ancient, her witch blood recognizing the residue of massive trauma.